the most immoral military right now in the world that is bombing hospitals in front of our eyes.
Jonathan?
Yeah, it's it's various levels of ridiculous. But listen, Mehdi, there's been a job opening. Israel finally got rid of Abu Obaida, a very prolific and well-do Hamas
You've really got to get better with your Hamas propaganda. You're a
language,
racist,
small man.
genocidal,
mind your language,
war criminal.
small man.
You support
mind
war
your
criminals.
Language, little
Well, you're trying to put a target on me? Are you and Elon Levy trying to put a target on me? Are you trying to put a target on me? You keep saying I'm Hamas, and you support killing Hamas.
You've done it
so
with
do you
Elon,
want
and
to
it
kill
won't
me?
work with me,
But I
little
know.
Mehdi. Little Mehdi,
If your
you've done
argument
that
is
shtick
that
with
any brown
Elon,
Muslim
it doesn't impress
is
me.
Hamas,
But I'm telling you,
trying
is
to put
that
a target
if you
on me?
improve your Arabic just a bit,
You keep saying I'm Hamas based on nothing.
If you improve your Arabic just a bit, I think you are well on track to become a very prolific spokesperson for
your
Hamas.
Troops engaged in sexual violence against Palestinian women.
Abu Obaida.
You're being investigated in the International Criminal Court.
Touting
you are part of an army
propaganda
that is
lies.
committing genocide, Jonathan.
Mehdi, you are touting Hamas's propaganda lies. You are regurgitating things from April and from September.
The genocidal Israeli military.
Let me jump in. Jonathan, let me jump in, please.
Israeli military.
All right.
And now you want to kill every journalist that speaks out against you.
Yeah,
You
Jonathan.
killed 5 journalists last week.
Jonathan,
now you
on that, Jonathan.
That was one feisty exchange the other night on Piers Morgan Uncensored, featuring Jonathan Conricus and Mehdi Hasan. Our guest today is State of Tel Aviv regular and pundit extraordinaire, FDD Senior Fellow, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus. I've long been interested in how independent media is doing its job in this new world, and in particular with respect to Piers Morgan and his show Uncensored, because he has really spent a lot of time on the Israel-Hamas conflict, and he's had Jonathan on his show very frequently. In fact, Jonathan and I spoke in a recent podcast about why he participates on Piers Morgan's show and what he thinks the pros and cons are. It's a very candid discussion worth listening to if you didn't catch it the first time around. And Conricus and I delve into this topic again at the beginning of this podcast. Conricus and I then get into the main event today, which is the IDF military operation in Gaza City. He explains why, in his view, pressing on with this military operation, about which there is significant dissent within Israel, but why he thinks this is the right and the only thing to do. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, and today, coming to you from Vienna, Austria. It was a perfect late summer day here. Warm, sunny, and I really did literally stop in one of the many beautiful parks around the city to smell the roses in an extraordinary rose garden. Sunday, September 7th, morning time in Israel, where you are. Jonathan Conricus, lovely to see you. How are you today?
Good morning. I am relatively well. Thank you.
Relatively, I'm sure that is intended to invoke the continuing insanity that we find ourselves working through and living through every day. And that's an understatement if ever there was one. But let's jump right into it, shall we? Because we don't have a lot of time and there's always too much to talk about. So we'll start light, because I'm sure many of our listeners are interested in hearing what I'm very interested in hearing about from you, which is your recent appearance on the Piers Morgan show, aside Mehdi Hasan. And I confess I have not watched the whole thing from beginning to end, but the clips were enough for me. So I want you to, if you wouldn't mind, just address briefly 2 points that are actually serious points. One is you are one of the people who continues to appear on Piers Morgan, who also supports Israel and its right to exist. The voices like yours represented on his show, which has millions of viewers globally, are far and few between. Mehdi Hasan is on not infrequently, but there are so many little Medis who appear on Piers Morgan. The bottom line is Israel's really fighting an uphill battle in what you can call it what you want. Hasbara, PR war, explaining, getting ears to actually listen to rational speakers, try to set out what's going on in the Middle East, in Israel, in Gaza Strip. You probably are A+ guy, and it's good that you're on that show for some reasons. It's not good for others, but you continue to go. And because it went so viral and continues to, I'd just like you to riff and tell us about what that night was like. Mehdi, from what I could see, lost his cool frequently. Was there any substance?
Yeah, well, thank you for the kind introduction. And yes, since our last conversation, I've had lots of calls or messages from Piers' team inviting me to come on whatever debate. And I made it clear to his team that I will only be debating people that have some intellectual tethering into the situation. Not going to give airtime and oxygen to comedians and wannabe self-appointed people who think that they understand the situation, people who haven't been in the area, people who don't speak the language, people who are just, grifters and comedians and entertainers. I'm not going to be an opposite number of those. And I happily debate Palestinians who speak English. I'd happy to debate ambassadors or other people. That'd be great. But I drew the line in terms of, seriousness. Mehdi Hasan, for all his shortcomings, I think has a long vested interest in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And at least I think he has some kind of understanding of what the situation is. Of course, from a perverted and Muslim Brotherhood kind of perspective, but at least he's vested in the conflict. And I think he's a good representative for Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood. And I think he can speak for the other side. And that's why I decided that it's a good opportunity to be on. Not really happy with the debate itself because I think we spoke over each other way too much. And at some point in the debate, Mehdi, who I think he wrote the book of how to win every argument. And in that book, I've been told, I haven't read it, but in the book, I've been told that there is some reference to composure, choosing your words, staying focused on the message and being on point, etc. He completely lost the plot there and started swearing, lots of personal insults that were really detached from reality, lots of screaming on his behalf. And that I think was triggered by the fact that I seriously mentioned to him that there's a job opening here, that Israel finally got rid of the head of psychological operations, the person in Hamas that was the mastermind behind its communications, media, PR, psychological warfare strategy, and also the face behind the kafir, Abu Ubaidah. His real name was Kahlut. And Israel finally took him out. Took us a lot of time. He was quite elusive, but it's important, even though he wasn't a combat commander, but Abu Ubaidah was really influential and really directed strategy and had a profound influence. And I think Mehdi has a profound influence on Western minds and on people who claim or think and believe that they are liberals, progressive, who want to support a certain cause. I think he's an excellent grifter and a showman. I think he's a talented speaker, very cynical. And I think that it would be a great fit for him as someone who is a stealth agent of the Muslim Brotherhood in Western society, that he actually saddle up and, really officially go in and do officially what he's been doing unofficially. He didn't like that. And he tried to, flip that into as if I was pointing a target or a mark on him. And I think he thought that if he would lash out and respond with lots of screaming and a tantrum, that I would be deterred from saying what I was saying, but I wasn't. And I still stand by it. And I think that it would be, if he, only brushed up on his Arabic. I don't know how good his spoken Arabic is. I know he knows Islamic and Quran verses, and he knows the key words of Quranic teachings, but I don't know how good his Arabic is. So if that's good enough, then maybe he could assume such a position, and it could be interesting for him.
It is interesting on so many levels, but one of them is that Mehdi has been challenged publicly frequently, often, about who his paymasters are. He's been questioned directly about whether or not Qatar supports his enterprise financially. It came up at the debate in Toronto just over a year ago when it was Mehdi and Gidon Levy opposing Douglas Murray and Natasha Hausdorff. And Douglas made the comment very straight up. You've just alluded to it. And he never answers, and he never addresses that directly. And it would probably be helpful to him, to his supporters, to the world, if he actually came out and said it.
I think we should have a new system in new media, podcasters, and also in traditional media. I envision a system like race drivers, right? You have race drivers, and every square inch of their suits, is covered with commercials. There's a little sticker and a logo for this or whatever, because it's important, right? It's airtime and people see it, and they're high performance athletes. I think the same thing should be true for high performance and high influencers. Tucker Carlson, Mehdi isn't quite in his league, but he's definitely influential. I would like to see stickers that indicate who pays. I would be happy to put, stickers on myself. I'd have one sticker. That'll be FDD, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I'm a senior fellow there. And then I would have an Israeli flag because I'm Israeli. Other than that, nobody pays me. Nobody sponsors. But with Mehdi and with Tucker and many others, there are questions. And I think they should be answered, because I think people should know who pays for the content that they're getting and what kind of guidelines the content comes with and what kind of strings are attached. And I don't know who pays Mehdi. I don't know who bankrolls his media thing, the little BDS supporting stealth Muslim Brotherhood kind of destabilizing outlet that he has, Zeteo. But it would be interesting to know, and I think it's just, due diligence and fair exposure that you say where your money comes from. And if I were Mehdi, I think that would be in my interest to disclose.
Well, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, because I would suggest that same rationale should apply to educational institutions, to NGOs, to media independent,
to think tanks as well.
And to think tanks. There should be transparency, and there is very little.
Yeah.
Let's move on now, though, to the topic of the moment, which, of course, is, we can no longer say the imminent offensive on Gaza City, because it's clearly begun. And there is tremendous debate within Israel about whether or not this is the right thing to do. There's so many layers to this debate, but I'm just going to try to really simplify for the listener and then hand it over to you to explain and get into the nuance. We have a situation where the government takes the position that the remaining hostages are being held in the Gaza City area, that they will either negotiate an all or nothing deal, meaning all hostages come out at the same time, living and dead, and Hamas lays down its arms and relinquishes power. End of story. Hamas clearly has not agreed to that and will not agree to that, in my view. And so Prime Minister Netanyahu, who I believe has fishtailed a fair bit in the last few weeks, but now is very clearly saying, we're going in, we're in, and we're going to get the job done. You also have on the other side the security establishment, the IDF chief of staff, who has said many times over the last weeks, this is only going to imperil the lives of the hostages, and it will likely end up seeing Israel mired in the Gaza Strip as an occupying force for the indefinite future. Help us parse all of this and understand why Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government are of the view that going into Gaza City militarily is the right thing to do and the only thing to do. And please work into this one aspect of the recent hostage video of Guy Gilboa Dalal that was released, because I think it's very important. What Hamas did was they had him seated in a vehicle that was at times moving around Gaza City. The IDF confirmed that was Gaza City. And Guy Gilboa Dalal at times is moving around. At times he's in a tunnel in a very dark place, looking anguished. And at times he's sitting in the car and it's sitting still, or appears to be, not moving. Those vignettes are provocations in a way, or taunts to Israel, saying, you don't know where your hostages are. We're moving around in Gaza City openly, and you can't even find us. So there's a very interesting dynamic, and we shall give credit to Abu Obaida, because I believe this was his last propaganda film made before he was taken out by the IDF. So over to you, Mr. Conricus, Lieutenant Colonel. What's going on?
Yeah, so I think you gave a very good analysis or 30,000 feet overview. And I'll pick a few of the topics that you opened up, and I'll try to deep dive into them and make sense of it. So one I think is really important is in terms of perspective and zoom. Many Israelis speak about the hostages as if they are the primary national objective of the state of Israel in this war, and putting feelings aside and my sympathy, empathy with the families and the terrible ordeal that they are suffering and have been suffering for more than 700 days. I put that aside and I talk hard strategy and running and winning a war. The hostages are secondary to winning the war. Winning the war is what matters for all of Israel. Getting the hostages back matters for all of Israel, matters for the West, matters for the Jewish people, matters for every Israeli. But what the government is saying is that we are going to defeat the enemy, and the objective here is to get them, the enemy, to agree to a complete surrender, which is exactly what you stated. Hamas turns over all of the hostages and gets terrorists in return, and then Hamas surrenders and stops controlling Gaza. I share your skepticism about the feasibility or the likelihood of Hamas relinquishing power. And another important point is that I don't think that we have started quite yet. I would say that in terms of operations, Israel, the IDF, is still in the shaping phase of operations. It is still in the realm of applying pressure, military pressure on Hamas, that is translated also into diplomatic pressure, Egypt, Qatar, and to a certain extent Turkey, but it's mostly Egypt and Qatar. And the purpose here is to impress upon Egypt and Qatar that if you don't get your little ally in Gaza, Hamas, to agree to the terms, then we will go in, and this you will also share responsibility for what happens, and the suffering will also be on your conscience. Clearly, Israel will be blamed much more for it, but I think that is the messaging of Israel. Brings me closer to a very important country that I think we should speak about, and that is Egypt. Egypt, interesting things are happening in Egyptian and the corridors of power in Egypt, and some of it is filtering up into the media as well. What we're seeing is unprecedented levels of aggressive rhetoric against Israel. I don't yet know how to exactly analyze it and, to tag it and to assess the level of sincerity behind it. But we are seeing very harsh, aggressive rhetoric, and the word war and 1973 is mentioned very frequently in Egyptian media, also state-controlled media, and the people that are usually mouthpieces for regime thinking in Egypt. And that is worrying. And I think the Egyptians are, for the first time since October 7, maybe feeling significant pressure when it comes to the fact that they, in their cruelty, are denying Gazans, civilians, a way out of an active war zone. They just issued a statement a day and a half ago where they were reconfirming the fact that, yes, according to their words, there is a genocide being perpetrated in Gaza, but in the same sentence, or the following one, we're also not going to open the gates and allow people to escape that alleged genocide, and they have to stay in the area where they're being allegedly slaughtered. Makes absolutely no sense, especially when you're talking about a Muslim Arab country speaking about Muslim Arab civilians. Logic would lend that the Egyptians would allow people that are suffering and facing genocide a way to escape. But that isn't the case, and it's very exposing of Egypt's real intentions. And it's interesting to see that what's filtering out of Egyptian communications probably is a result of Israeli pressure via Washington. I'm sad to see that Egypt isn't a talking point, that Washington isn't deeply assessing its relations with Egypt, isn't holding Egypt accountable for the fact that had it not been for Egyptian decisions, this war would have been over months ago. Had Egypt allowed Gazans out temporarily into dignified humanitarian shelters in the Sinai Peninsula, then Hamas would have been left without their main asset, or their secondary main asset. The most important asset for Hamas are hostages. The second is the civilian population, which they use as human shields, and they count on casualties being inflicted in Gaza, and that's how they leverage global public opinion. And the fact that Israel has failed to apply that pressure from October 7 or 8 until today is a travesty. And Egyptian actions are of the most cruel, the most cynical that I've seen in the Arab world. They are really in violation of international law. According to international law, when people try to flee a war zone, you as a neighboring country that isn't part of the conflict are obliged to allow asylum. And the fact that Egypt officially is preventing women, children, elderly, disabled, and sick people, I'm not talking about able-bodied young men who are Hamas fighters, I'm talking about the weakest parts of civil society, Egyptians aren't letting them out. That is a travesty. And the fact that isn't top news every day is a travesty. It shows how corrupt the international system is, and it shows how biased media is, and also, sadly, the shortcomings of Israeli messaging capabilities and Israeli political power. For all of those who claim that Israel has an all-powerful lobby in the US and many other things, well, if that were the case, Egypt would have been forced to open the gates and Hamas would have been left without their human shields. I think that we're still in the shaping phase, and that Israel still is hoping for the pressure to be brought to bear on Hamas so that Israel won't need to go in. Out of all of the things that you said, the risk to the hostages, which I agree, the maneuver will add risk to the hostages, and Hamas will leverage each and every movement of Israeli forces by psychological warfare. They will continue to apply pressure on Israeli families of hostages in order to deepen the wedge or the rift in Israeli society. But at the end of the day, I think Israel wants to get this done without having to go in. I am much more concerned, actually, with the day after. And I think that the comments made by Israel's chief of staff, the excellent, brave, competent, and true patriot, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, is telling the government and the cabinet, listen, we can go in, we can destroy what's left of Hamas in and under Gaza. This is the assessed risk to hostages, and that's something that you politicians will have to sign off on, and responsibility will rest on your shoulders, because we're going to make clear that it does. But what he's really saying is that at the end of it, we know that by the laws of war, if we break it, we own it. We don't want to own it. We don't want to govern the Gaza Strip. We don't want to be solely responsible for 1.5 million, 2 million civilians there. And if we go in and take the last piece of land that isn't yet controlled by Israel in Gaza, then we will. And we don't want to. And he's asking, and I think a very fair and relevant question, what is the strategic plan, cabinet? You're ordering me, the IDF, to go in and to basically establish military control. But at the end of the day, who will we be handing over control of Gaza to? And that is perhaps the most important question. In Hebrew, we say, Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat chila, that before you take action, you have to really think things out and have a clear plan of action. That is what the IDF Chief of Staff is asking the government. And as far as I know, there's not a clear answer. It's item number 5 on the list of the Prime Minister's requirements, that is international non-Hamas governance that is not hostile to Israel. I believe that's the wording. That isn't good enough for the IDF, and I don't think it's good enough for Israel. It's vague, and it's exactly the kind of environment that will be permissible for all kinds of wacko ideas that exist in Israeli society of settlement and reviving Gush Katif and other things that I think are not at all in line with Israeli national interests.
No, but they do happen to be, especially that last little basket of things that you mentioned, they are very much in line with the views and ideology that prevail in the current coalition government, and to which the Prime Minister, whenever he is required to in order to control or maintain control of the government, he has invariably acceded to those ideas. I think we'll wrap up on that. I want to make one brief point. When you say that, we're just starting, and we are encircling and squeezing and putting on the pressure. But my understanding is that we now control more than 60% of Gaza City. And of course, the demolition of the high-rise buildings that was beamed all over the world yesterday and the day before, that was done for a reason. That was done to send a message. But I think that the lack of strategy, if I can be so bold, is something that has prevailed throughout this war, that we have seen decisions be taken, very bold decisions that don't seem to have been thought through. And this, again, as the IDF Chief of Staff is warning, and you mentioned, think it through, know where you're going. And the fact that we likely have not thought it through and don't have a plan and haven't really discussed this in detail with the Americans is concerning. The government often floats the possibility of the UAE coming in with the Saudis and, running some kind of multilateral force on the ground. I say it'll be a cold day in hell when other Arab nations put boots on the ground in the Gaza Strip. But I suppose we'll all have to see about that. And you had your words for Egypt, and I say we must include Qatar, because maybe I'm delusional, but I really do believe that if Qatar decided tomorrow that this has to end, that they have the ability, the levers, so many, financial, diplomatic, to end this. And they don't. So we'll leave that for another day.
It's a lot to unpack, and we leave listeners hanging, but I think all the topics that you touched on are exactly things that we should explore. Qatar is a state sponsor of terrorism. Qatar is a driving force of global dimensions when it comes to Islamist agendas and, generally speaking, the philosophy of the Muslim Brotherhood. It is a country that uses its tremendous, fantastic wealth in order to undermine Western society, in order to challenge the Judeo-Christian type of governance that we have in the West. And their worldview is an Islamist, imperialistic, and quite medieval interpretation of a certain branch of Islam. And they're doing it with smiles and concerts and soccer tournaments, and of course, buying anybody and everybody that has influence in the US, in the UK, and many other countries. And of course, they have significant pull and influence over Hamas. And I don't know if I agree 100% with if Qatar says stop, Hamas will stop. But I say that they definitely have lots of influence, and they are also getting away with murder.
I think, you know what? If Doha froze all financial payments to Hamas, and if America and the other Western nations would be so bold as to freeze Qatari assets in their countries, I'm gonna go crazy and say this would end between 24 and 48 hours.
Yeah, you could start with the personal bank accounts of Hamas bigwigs that are living the life of luxury in Doha and other places. Yeah, that would hurt.
And that should have happened almost 2 years ago. And on that cheerful note, thanks again. And I suppose, yes, we leave people wondering and questioning and wanting more, but I'd like all the answers too. And we're all in the same boat at the end of the day. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thanks, as always, for being here. Please take the time to rate us on your podcast platform. Give us a great rating. It really helps with the algorithm and increasing our online presence so that more people will discover us. And don't hesitate to support us with a paid subscription on our Substack site, stateoftelaviv.com, or buy me a coffee. You can see the link on our website or on the screen now. And today, I ask that you make it one of those magnificent Viennese coffees. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jon Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.